Alright, we're back, and now we are going to be talking about power chords. Power chords are by far the most widely used chord in rock music, and it's what's going to give you that really cool sound that you hear with a lot of the songs you like to listen to. So let me just play a quick little intro with power chords, and then we'll break it down and show you what's up. Alright, cool. So those are power chords. As you can see, it's got that real good rock sound that you hear a lot. The really cool thing about these chords, just like the scale we just learned, is that they're movable. So once you learn the shape, it's just a matter of moving it to a different spot on the neck to get a different chord happening. Okay? So let's break this down and from square one, and we'll see what we can get going with it. And just to note, I had my distortion on for that little chord progression. So on your amp, it's either distortion or gain, and you usually either have a button or a switch that'll change channels. So that's the sound we're looking for. I'm going to go back to a clean tone, though, to show you how to break this down so we can get it to sound good. Okay? So we'll start off with a lot of things we do, at the 5th fret. It's always just a good place in the middle of the neck to work, and then we could always move around from there. So just to note, that note, the name of that note at the 5th fret on the big E string is A. And then also the notation for a power chord is a little 5. So whenever you see a chord name with a little 5 next to it, that means that you're going to play a power chord. Okay? So let's start out by putting our first finger on the 5th fret of the big E string. Okay? Then what we're going to do is put our ring finger on the 7th fret of the A string and our pinky on the 7th fret of the D string. Just like with the other chords we were talking about, I want to keep these two fingers tight together. Okay? Squeeze them up, pushing good and hard together, so that way they feel like one big finger. Okay? So there's only 3 notes in this chord. Actually, there's only 2 notes in the chord, but you commonly put the pinky down to add the same note twice to get a fuller sound. So let's do this one at a time, hit each note, and see how they sound. Okay, good. So again, technique, going to stay in the middle of the fret, your thumb's going to stay in the middle of the neck facing up, some room between my palm and the fretboard. My fingers are nice and curved and pushing in. Okay, my first finger is going to lay it a little more flat for this chord, and we'll talk about that in a second. But let's one more time see if we can get those notes to sound good. Alright, good. So again, one at a time before I play it all at once. Okay, so those are the basic chords, or the basic notes. Now, something we need to be careful of here, the last 3 strings, okay, we don't want those to ring out. Now, again, you can just be careful with your right hand or your strumming hand the way you play it, but that's going to be problematic after you get used to this, because you're going to want to have fun rocking out and playing hard and heavy. So to do that, what you're going to want to do is mute those last 3 strings. The way we do that is with our first finger. Okay, if you look at my first finger, I'm going to lay it a lot more flat than usual. That's going to have this part of my finger touch the bottom 3 strings and mute them. So here's how it sounds if I do one string at a time. Okay, good. So you can see how those are not ringing out, and my top 3 are. So now I could go ahead and strum them all. Alright, and that way the only 3 strings that ring out are the top 3. Okay, so that'll take some practicing, but again, you only want the top 3 to ring out, the bottom 3 should mute, and I'm going to do that by laying the first finger more flat. Okay, so that's the basic shape of the power chord. Alright, now, like we said, it's movable, so we're going to do a little chord progression here, and we're going to start at the 5th fret, but we're going to go the 5th fret, the 1st fret, the 3rd fret, and then back to the 5th fret. Those notes are A, F, and G. Okay, so we're going to go A5, F5, G5. Okay, here's how it sounds when we're done with it. Okay, it's a pretty common rock progression, so you'll have some fun with this one once you get it down really good. So to break it down, what we want to do before we play it all at once is play each chord one note at a time, but hold the notes out and see how long you can get them to sustain for. In other words, like this. Okay, what that does is it helps your hand get to know the shape really well. By pushing down and holding down, the sustain just keeps the notes ringing. So that way my hand memorizes the shape and how hard it needs to push down to get the chord to sound good. After you do that a few times and you could hear the notes ring out really well, then go ahead and play all the chords, all the notes at once. Alright, good. So again, even if you don't want to do the chord progression, if you take the first chord and do one note at a time, just hold it there and see how long you could have them ring out. Okay? If you do this and they come off, okay, you're letting up the pressure. So make sure you keep it down so that the notes sound really good. Okay? So that's the chord and the chord progression. Now that was all based on the E string. We could actually do the same chord but base it on the A string. All we need to do is move each finger down one string each. Okay? So now that we're there, it's the same chord shape, and now we're just going to focus on those three notes on those three strings. Okay, good. So now there's an extra thing though that we need to worry about when we base this shape on the A string. The big E string should not be ringing out. If it does, you're going to get a pretty wicked sound. Alright, it's going to have that big low bassy note that's not going to sound good with the chord. So what I could do to control this note is use the tip of my first finger to barely touch that string and again mute it. Okay, so if I do one note at a time with a clean tone, you can see that it's not ringing out. Okay. Alright, and I still want the first finger to push down on the A string so I get that note to ring. Okay? So now I'm free to go ahead and hit all the strings and it sounds good and tight. Okay? So let's try that same chord progression, but now we're going to do it on the A string. So these notes are D, B flat, and C. Okay? Here's how it sounds. Alright, cool. So same movement. As you can see, it's a movable shape, and my chord is going to stay the same, it just moves. Okay? So something to think about when you do move these chords. If you look at my hand, the whole shape of my hand stays tightened together, and the whole arm moves. Okay? So the more you could keep your fingers in the same position, the better. At first, if you kind of come up, let your fingers wander, and then figure it out again, you're going to have more of a time in between until it sounds good. So when you move, try and lock your hand in the same shape, and that way you have your chord ready to go wherever you are. Okay? So these chords are mostly done on the E and the A strings, so experiment playing them all over the place. Okay? And I'll give you some more chord progressions as we go, but start there and see how you can get it to sound. Okay? So those power chords. And we'll be back soon to talk about some cool techniques you could do to make them more fun to play.